This is ContactTalkRadio.com, consciousness in action, and you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and Upsnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Welcome to Sex is Medicine, your number one resource for holistic sex education. I'm Devi Ward Erickson, and I invite you to join me every week for another enriching and powerful conversation about the intersection of sexuality, spirituality, pleasure, and personal growth. Each episode of Sex is Medicine is dedicated to awakening your heart and mind to the true purpose and power of human sexuality. Please join me on this journey of self-discovery as we explore the art of using pleasure as medicine to awaken, heal, and empower every area of your life. Sex is Medicine broadcasts every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific on Contact Talk Radio Network. You can listen to the replay and subscribe to Sex is Medicine on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. And now get ready for another episode of Sex is Medicine. Hey everybody, welcome to Sex is Medicine, your number one resource for holistic sex education. I am Devi Ward Erickson, delighted to be here with you again on this Thursday evening, sharing intimate conversations about sexuality, spirituality, pleasure, and personal growth. I am joined here this evening with my esteemed colleague and husband, Dr. Chris Erickson. Say hello, Dr. Erickson.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Yay. And today we are going to be talking with you about Buddhist sexual Tantra. And the reason that we wanted to talk about this is because this is a less well-known topic. The less well-known aspect of Buddhism is the sexual origins and the sexual roots of this tradition. Traditionally, Buddhist Tantra has two paths to realization, that of the monk and that of the Tantric Yogi or householder, also called a Ngakpa. I personally was instructed in the sexual application of traditional Tibetan Tantric practices by my root Lama. I was initially introduced to these practices through my mentor, and then I was given permission to practice some of the more advanced Vajrayana Tantra sexual yoga practices by my Lama. And because most Westerners have been introduced to Tibetan Buddhist Tantra via celibate monks, there's a misconception that traditional Tantra does not include or even emphasize sexual teachings. But actually, when we look at the historical roots and origins of Tibetan Buddhist Tantra specifically, nothing could be further from the truth. The very roots of Tibetan Buddhist Tantra stem from sexual yoga practices. So in this episode today, we're going to discuss what some of those historical roots are, what the roots, the sexual and historical roots of our particular lineage, the Shank Pikage lineage, and then just discuss some differences between Buddhist Tantra and Hindu Tantra and Neo-Tantra. So here we are. So, I'm going to just share with you all a little bit about how I came to Tantra. And I'm going to explore this in a little bit more detail in a few episodes, at the end of the month or next month, where I talk about how the modality of authentic Tantra was actually developed. So my first introduction to Tibetan Buddhist Tantra was, on Hawaii, on the island of Kauai. And I was in relationship with a student of my Lama Tashi. I didn't understand what a Lama was. I had been a monk of this Hindu tradition. I was like, Buddhist Tantra was not something I was even remotely interested in. But my partner at the time was very into Vajrayana Buddhist practice. And he had some books about it. And one of the books he had was called Drukpa Kunli, The Divine Madman. And in this book, it's a historical biography of a yogi, of an enlightened yogi named Drukpa Kunli. And Drukpa Kunli traveled around India and Tibet and basically fucked people into enlightenment. Like, that's what he did. And he There's stories of him banishing demons by making his Vajra, which is his penis, into a giant club and beating the demon over the head with his giant penis, and making women orgasm from across the room. And he was kind of a madman, right? He accurately named. So this was my introduction to Tibetan Buddhism. So my introduction to Tibetan Buddhism was not the Dalai Lama or monks or this very quiet celibate thing. It was this dude wandering around the, northern India and into Tibet, fucking people into enlightenment. And then my next introduction to Tantra was the Tibetan 5 Elements sexual teaching. So that was how I was introduced to Tantra. I wasn't introduced to Tantra through Hinduism or Indian spirituality or Neo-Tantra. I was introduced to Tantra from this standpoint that sexuality was an integral aspect of Vajrayana Tantra practice. Mm-hmm. And our Lama Tashi, is a Ngakpa. That's spelled Ngakpa. So I encourage you to Google that. And in the Ngakpa tradition, they are not monks. They are householders. They're more than householders, not just like run-of-the-mill householders. They have vows and oaths that they take and tremendous levels of practice. And our Lama, was one of the first Westerners to ever go through the 3.5-year Lama training retreat, 40 years ago. But our Lama, Lama Tashi at kawaidharma.org, is a householder, and he has a job, and he's got a wife, and he's got kids, and he's got pets, and he is a sexual yogi. And so again, the introduction and the infusion of Tantra into my bloodstream has been rooted in this normalization and integration of human sexuality into the path of realization. And this is very congruent with the actual documented historical roots of Buddhist Tantra in Tibet. So Buddhism was being introduced. Buddhism started in India and was introduced into Tibet in the 8th century, which was in the 700s. I'm qualifying that because if you're like me, I get confused when you say 8th century and you mean the 700s. That still messes me up. But in the 700s, CE, I guess it's called these days, Buddhism was starting to be introduced into Tibet. And it initially was introduced by a monk, right? Monk, abbot, abbot dude.
There was an abbot out of India that was invited to present it to the Tibetan people, and it just didn't work. It just flat out didn't work. Various stories say that the monk returned to the king and essentially said, the Tibetan people are too wild to learn this, and so I can't teach them. There's other stories about there being an outbreak of smallpox or something at the same time that the abbot was unable to control and was actually blamed for. So he was kind of ousted from the country eventually. The abbot returned to India and then convinced Padmasambhava to go to Tibet. And Padmasambhava had a very different approach. And had a lot more success in bringing Buddhism to Tibet. Now, this is happening in the 700s. There's some stories of Buddhism arriving in Tibet as early as 200 or even before, but it just didn't have the impact that it had in later centuries.
Yeah, and so I remember reading the story about, I think this was there's so many books. So a few books that we recommend, Passion and Enlightenment by Miranda Shaw. Mm-hmm. There's another book about Tibetan medicine. Chris and I are studying Tibetan medicine from the Tibetan Medicine Educational Center. And so we have all these pieces that come to us as far as stories and legends and all of that. But what I really remember is this phrase talking about how Buddhism came to Tibet and how the Tibetan people, the abbot was basically said, I can't teach these people. They're too wild, which probably meant they actually were humans and enjoyed sex. And so they sent in Padmasambhava specifically because he was a sexual yogi. And here's where it gets even juicier. Padmasambhava was able to establish Buddhism in Tibet through sexual yoga practices with his consort Yeshe Sogyal. And Yeshe Tsogyal is considered the first Lama in Tibet. Lama means teacher. She was the first Lama, first teacher of Buddhism in Tibet. And she and her consort, Padmasambhava, helped establish it as a spiritual yogic practice through their sexual union. And Padmasambhava also had 5 main consorts. So he was running around Tibet getting freaky with all these dakinis and India doing sexual Vajrayana sexual practices. So from the very historical roots of Tibetan Buddhism, it is rooted in sexual yoga. Like if Padmasambhava was not fucking Yeshe Tsogyal, there would be no such thing as Tibetan Buddhism, right? They tried it with a monk and people were like,
didn't
pass.
Yeah.
So they had to send in a sexual yogi, a sexual shaman, essentially, to weave the Buddhist teachings with the traditional teachings of the indigenous people of Tibet, which are the 5 elements, which is how we have the Tibetan 5-element sexual teachings. So that's Tibetan Buddhism in general. Tibetan Buddhism is rooted in sexual practice. Like that's just point blank. Then when you fast forward to the 10th or 11th century, you come to our particular lineage, which is the Shank Pikage lineage, which was founded by the Dakini Ngakpa. And Ngakpa was an Indian woman who had very, very, very dark skin. They called her the Black Dakini. And I believe they also called her Gyanamama. I can't pronounce it anyway. But what it means is woman with bones in her hair. So she was this like kind of wild, dark-skinned shaman woman who was a fully realized Buddha, and she fucked her students into enlightenment. Like that was how she passed on her teaching. She passed them on through sexual union practices, amongst other things. She also, according to legend, and, we don't know all the details of how people operated every day, but along with just general oral teaching, she gave sexual teachings. And in fact, the fusion of the 5 elements with Tibetan Buddhism, Ngakpa's sexual 5-element teachings were given to Naropa, according to what we understand, and Naropa then later founded the Kagyu school of Vajrayana Buddhism. So once again, the historical roots of our lineage and the historical roots of Tibetan Buddhism in general are rooted in these sexual yogic practices. Pardon me. And then once again, what I recommend the book Passion and Enlightenment by Miranda Shaw for a gynocentric, feminine view of Tantra. Because the thing to keep in mind is that again, in the West, most of our introduction to Tibetan Buddhist Tantra has come from monks, right? So when Tibet was invaded by China and they had to flee for their lives, it was the monasteries they targeted and massacred people. And so these lovely little monk people had to flee for their lives. And part of where they came to is here in North America, here in the West. And in fact, our Lama Tashi, encountered the head of the Shank Pikage lineage, Kala Rinpoche, again, 45-ish years ago, longer than I was alive, when I was just a glimmer in my mother's eye. Our Lama was being introduced to the 5-element teachings and Tibetan Buddhism, and he received the sexual instruction, the sexual application of the 5 elements from Kala Rinpoche. And Kala Rinpoche had sex. He's got some scandal. He has some sexual misconduct scandal, which is what happens when you have monks trying to have sex with Western women after their entire tradition teaches you that women aren't equal humans.
That's going to lead to some
misconduct. Yeah. Then you try to engage with them. Yeah, not a good idea. So sexuality has historically been a part of Buddhist Tantra from the very, very roots. So, and again, the reason that there's confusion about it is because most of our introduction to Buddhism in the West has come via celibate monks, and you kind of can't trust celibate monks to have a healthy view of sexuality, because that's the antithesis of their vows.
There's also been a backlash to the sexuality that is played up in Tantra simply because of the way that Tantra has been appropriated by the West. And in a lot of Neo-Tantra, it looks like the hedonism is the focus, and that is not what's going on with this. Part of this is you're using these drives that are intense and really, really strong, and you're using those drives to begin to examine how that plays out in your life. And is that ruling you, or are you ruling it? How do you get rid of that dichotomy? Like, how do you get rid of the insanity of it and tap into the potency of it? And that has been, again, misappropriated by a lot of what is known as Tantra in the West. The more Neo-Tantra stuff really does emphasize the hedonistic aspects. And that's not the point. Like, that's really not the point of genuine tantric practice.
Yeah. So the understanding the understanding that of the connection between orgasm and enlightenment was actually offered to me, or shared from a Rinpoche, from a Kagyu Rinpoche. And he shared, as you guys have heard me say many times, that at the moment of orgasm, at the peak of pleasure, the moving pranas, called the downward voiding winds, the moving pranas in the genitals brush the central channel, and we get a glimpse of enlightenment. So literally every orgasm, whether you're aware of this or not, just the way the human energy body is designed and physical body is designed, that at that moment of orgasm, at that peak of pleasure, we get a glimpse of our ultimate bliss nature, bliss void awareness. And that is built into the human design. So if we understand that that's literally inherent, that's literally how we were created by nature, by God, by whatever word you want to put there, it makes sense to, if it's already there, why wouldn't you want to work with that energy and kind of capitalize upon it, expand upon it, not capitalize like try to steal money from it or make money from it, but I mean build upon it. So if what we get in that moment is just like a sneeze, like a glimpse, what would happen if we used intention and focus and yogic methods to when we reach that peak, to sustain and enhance that peak? And what if we did yogic practices to increase the strength of that brushing and then sustain the longevity of how long we get to stay in that state of bliss void awareness? Well, what that does to the brain and to the nervous system and to the chemicals in the body is just unfathomable. And that's tantric union practice. Like when you and I are practicing our sexual union practice and we hit these peaks of orgasm, and it's literally like flying, right? It's like, they call it flying in the sky of mind of bliss. It's like literally like flying. Like it's ultimate voidness. There's no time. There's no me. There's no you. We are fused in union in this like column, like I see like a column or a field of white light. It's just just open, spacious bliss awareness.
Language doesn't reach it. So it's like you can talk about it, but you're just kind of pointing out a direction as opposed to saying, here's what it really is.
Instead of
you
actually
have to experience it, and you have to come to a realization of it, and once it stabilizes, and that's what it's all about.
And what I love, again, they call it union practice because this is what we're doing together. So together so we're in this physical union, and then we're in spiritual union and energetic union in this field of bliss consciousness. Now, the key is that you cannot sustain that level of bliss void consciousness sexually if you don't have the non-sexual focus and presence already established.
Exactly.
So that's where I think we get into some issues with Neo-Tantra or some traditional or classical Tantra practitioners saying, well, what do you guys, you're not supposed to be offering Tantric teachings without initiation, blah, blah, blah. Well, the issue is that for most people, myself included, we have to learn how to train our awareness to be present in the moment, in our bodies, here and now, no matter what is going on externally and no matter what is going on internally.
Yes.
So it's mind training.
Absolutely.
Right? And so that's where the non-sexual Tantra yoga practices come in, like the meditation practices and the breath yoga, is they are training the awareness and the focus, and also training our ability to move energy through our body intentionally without the added volatility of sexual energy, because that's some intense energy. And so you have to approach your practice with the non-sexual, or establish your capacity non-sexually before you can then introduce and integrate the intensity of the sexuality.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about as a meditator, as somebody that sort of can settle in and relax, do that in a quiet meditation space, no problem. Now do it on a roller coaster, right? Now do it at a concert. Now do it at a busy intersection. There's way more distraction. It requires much more intense focus. Okay, now do it while making love. Which, and again, drawing from Plato, the sexual drives are the most intense and the most insane. And so if you're able to maintain that meditative focus, even in that circumstance, that's why they call Tantra advanced practice, because it is. I mean, Tantra literally means to weave. Sutra translates as thread. And so if you don't have the threads, you're not going to be able to weave anything. So to work through Sutra into Tantra, that's why it's laid out that way. That's why it's important to remember that when you start working with the energy body, when you start working with moving energy, through your own system, never mind through the system of a partner, you need to know what you're doing. And so you can't just I read it in a book. Great. I could read every book there is about riding bikes, but until I get on one, I'm not going to be able to ride a bike. Same thing here. You could read about this all you want, but until you do it, that's where it starts to take root. And you begin with the non-sexual stuff. Because if you just leap straight to the sexual stuff, it's like plugging yourself into a wall socket.
Well, and also if you can't focus, you're just going to you're just going to go off, right? So you're not going to actually be able to cultivate that energy. And so here's there's all this mystique, the sexual teachings, blah, 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 it's a big deal. You guys, they're not that big of a deal. Pretty much almost every non-sexual Vajrayana Buddhist practice that I've done can be used sexually. Almost every single one. But again, with the guidance and permission of a Lama or a teacher. But I'm just saying, there's all this hoop-de-da, and you have to be mindful of where that hoop-de-da is coming from. So if that hoop-de-da is coming from an untrained mind, or someone who's afraid of sex and is freaked out by sex, it's going to seem like this big thing. But for people who have mind training and are integrated sexually, the highest Vajrayana sexual Tantra practices that I've done are simply the same ones that you do non-sexually. You just do them when you're having sex. And yes, they pack a punch, and they're incredible, and they're amazing, and they're intense, and they're blissful, but they're not that freaking hard. And you don't have to jump through all these hoops. You just have to train your freaking mind.
Yeah, you have to be able to maintain focus and presence.
And if you can do it non-sexually, you can do it sexually. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And again, slowly, gently proceed with caution, with the guidance of your Lama. If your Lama does not have aversion to sex, if your Lama has aversion to sex, anyone who has aversion to sex and does not believe that people with vulvas and vaginas are equal in humanity, I have a hard time taking advice from. It's a hard sell for me. Yeah. But if your Lama or your teacher is comfortable with their humanity and their sexuality, and they give you guidance that you can then do that, then it's there's not a bunch of mystery around it. There really, really isn't. It's very simple. It's very straightforward, and it's very practical. And that is the whole point of Buddhist Tantra. Buddhist Tantra was about practicality. It was about efficacy. It was about how do we make this human experience better?
Yeah.
How do we make our relationships better?
Yeah.
How do we use our relationship as fuel for realization? How do we use our relationship as a prayer, as a way to open our hearts and connect more with each other as human beings and with our environment? What is the practical application of your Tantra? And if it doesn't have a practical application, that's not improving your life and it's not improving the lives of others, then
what are you doing? I mean, why?
Then what's the point?
Yeah.
So there's that. So let's talk about some of the differences between Hindu Tantra and we'll say the Tibetan 5-element sexual Tantra, because that's the lineage that we're trained in. And I was told like very early on my training, to not mix lineages. So when you're introduced to a specific lineage of Tantra yoga, you practice under that tradition. You don't mix lineages because different lineages use the different energy body yogas differently.
Yeah.
And you'll be mixing medicine, and just like with Western medicine, like things can contraindicate each other or cancel each other out. Same with energy body medicine. Yeah. It's a prescription. And so whatever tradition you resonate with most, you stay within that tradition. So in our tradition of practice, we work with 5 chakras, which are placed along the central channel. And one of the main differences between Buddhist Tantra and Hindu Tantra is the placement of the central channel, the Sushumna Nadi. And in Hindu practices, or I'll say in what we're seeing as Western Neo-Tantra practices, which are based in Hinduism, as far as I know, they place the central channel in the spine. And they talk a lot about Kundalini energy and running the Kundalini energy up the spine and circulating it and blah, blah, blah. Well, I asked Lama Tashi about that, like why in the Hindu tradition it's placed in the spine and about running Kundalini energy. And his first words were, "Don't do that. You will get sick." Those were his first words. And what he said, what our Lama said, is that in this tradition, we place the central channel in front of the spine, in the center of the body. And the reason for that is when we leave the body, when we drop the body, we carry the energy body with us. And if the core of the energy body, which is your Sushumna Nadi, if the core of the life force energy is attached to a physical location, when that physical location no longer exists, it makes it harder to carry your energy body with you, essentially. Yeah. So, lamas are always concerned about what happens when you die. How do we make the death process easier?
It would lead to more confusion in the Bardo state, the between this life and the next one. It would lead to more confusion there where it doesn't need to be. That space is confusing enough as it is. So to be able to just tap into your central channel without looking for your spine first, which you're not going to have, it's easier to just know that it's the center of who you are
and practice your meditation accordingly. Right. So that's one of the major differences, is the location of the Sushumna Nadi. Also, I want to address Kundalini energy, because that's Kundalini. So Kundalini is fire element energy. So we work with the elements, earth, water, fire, air, and space. Kundalini energy is simply fire element energy. And fire element energy is sexual energy, and it's bliss energy. And so it's going to naturally be generated through your 5-element meditation practices. It's naturally generated. Fire element energy is what fuels your sexuality. So if you have your sex chakra as fire, there you go. And it just naturally, it's designed. We don't have to do a lot of gymnastics to move that energy through the body. It's designed to move through the body. What we need to do is relax, breathe, and allow it to move. And then, yes, there are methods that we can apply to more actively harness that energy and then direct it specifically to the body for healing, direct it specifically through all the energy centers for healing. So, and that is part of the methods of Vajrayana Tantra. offering methods for harnessing that energy and utilizing it, directing it skillfully with the intent of healing and bringing realization, increasing love, increasing joy, and increasing auspicious circumstances for all sentient beings, also known as bodhicitta.
Indian Tantra, like Hindu-based Tantra and Indian Buddhist Tantra, were very, very close. They were sort of competing systems that were operating sometimes literally in the same locations. And so you see in the Hindu tradition the absorption of Buddha into the pantheon. To say, yeah, if you're a Buddhist, you're really just a good Hindu, right?
Interesting.
And vice versa. So you'll often see in like in the Tibetan images of the various yidams and protectors and whatnot, they will often incorporate Hindu deities into those in various positions and whatnot, sometimes showing positions of subordination, right?
So there was some beef between these two schools. The Buddhists and the Hindus were like flexing and kind of competing, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they absolutely were. There's no question.
Fast forward to today.
Yeah.
Whose Tantra is better? And that's a good question. It's really, whose Tantra is better? What resonates with you?
What produces results?
Yes, but what produces results? But what produces the results that you want? Because it doesn't matter what the heck I say. Like, this is the Tantra that works for me. Yeah. Other Tantra doesn't work for me. This Tantra works for me. It's improved my life. It's improved my health. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't even dream. Like 10 years ago, I couldn't have even dreamed of doing what I'm doing now. First government accredited school for Tantra. Like we've faculty, like all of this stuff. And it's all a result of the Tantra that we practice, Absolutely. But it's what we practice. So really the best Tantra for you is the Tantra that calls your heart, that nourishes your soul, that enhances your life. That's the best Tantra for you. And it could be a combination. I mean, we were taught, as kind of traditionalists to not mix medicines, but for you as a seeker, and just as a lay person out in the world, as a practitioner, you may find aspects and teachings from other traditions that you weave into whatever you're doing. It's not like, there's not good stuff in other places. So it's really about what makes your heart sing and what calls you, what speaks to you. Yeah. That is the right Tantra for you. That is the best Tantra for you, whatever that is.
Tantra is meant to be practiced. And if your practice is a chore, if your practice is like a job, you just got to do it. Well, you're taking away the potential for joy that can be used to accelerate your spiritual growth. And so if you're paying attention to a process, and spiritual growth is not always the easiest thing you ever do. You face some nasty stuff. But if you can sprinkle that with joy, it sort of lubricates the process.
Pleasure is medicine.
Absolutely.
Right? Yes. Absolutely. Pleasure is lube.
Yeah. And so it's different people are going to respond differently to different things. I mean, Buddha himself said there's 84,000 pathways to enlightenment. So it's not like, one and only one. That doesn't work.
Well, and that gets us into dogma. And that's another difference between the path of the monk and the path of the tantrika. So, or the sexual yogi, right? So that's one of the things that we encounter in our work that we're doing, running out in the world and sharing Tibetan Buddhist sexual teachings. Not everybody likes that. Not everybody's happy about that. And some of the main complaints are from monks who are taught that according to Lama, one of Lama Tashi's teachers, Lama Rinchen, who wrote a book about his growing up as a monk, and the way he describes the methods that they use to annihilate their sexual desire are pretty extreme and profoundly traumatizing. And so they literally consciously cultivate aversion to sex and aversion to people with vaginas and aversion to their own genitals. Like they create a meditation on hating their genitals. Just like, die genitals, you're bad, you're rotten, filthy, nasty, disgusting.
It's like an energetic castration.
It's an energetic castration. Yes, that's exactly what it is.
And the question, and if that's your path, great. Okay, that's fine. Not everybody.
I don't think that's fine. I don't think that it's fine to energetically castrate yourself.
I don't think so. I don't think that it's fine in the long run, in the sense of how can you claim to be fully integrated and fully enlightened when you're truncating the core of your existence? Like, you don't exist without a mother and a father. You don't exist without sexual contact. We are the products of sexual reproduction. And so by cutting ourselves off from that, we literally cut ourselves off from our humanity. And so the question is, by rejecting that, and this, I would love to have a debate about this with somebody who knows more than I do.
Putting out the call.
That'd be great. How can you claim to be fully enlightened when you're not incorporating a huge aspect of your humanity? And that raises an enormous question for me.
Yeah, and what I want to say is that what I don't think is okay is energetically castrate is the method for disavowing sexuality.
Yeah.
If people don't want to be sexual, there's lots of people walking around that are asexual, and that is freaking awesome. Like, your choice around your sexuality is your choice. And if you choose to be celibate, hell yes. But if you choose to be celibate by denying and literally traumatizing yourself as part of your dogmatic tradition, and then you hate on other people.
Yeah. And then insisting that your way is the only way.
That's a problem. So I'm suggesting that for those who choose to be celibate or asexual, perhaps there's a healthier way to address sexuality and sexual desire, aside from visualizing your genitals being devoured by a snaggletooth hag who is going to drag you to the hell realms. That may not be the most compassionate and loving strategy for dealing with sexual desire. Yeah. Just a thought. So, but you know what I find interesting is, and some of you may find this interesting too, I found it interesting when I first began, is that this tension between the path of the monk and the path of the tantrika, the sexual yogi, is again historical. Yeah. That's been there from the beginning, and there's been historical debates and showdowns essentially around whose path is better and whose path is going to lead you to enlightenment more quickly. If you're a monk and you withdraw from society and all you do is meditate all day, is that going to lead to full realization quicker than basically diving fully into the trenches of what it is to be human and basically consuming the poison of what it is to be human and transmuting it into power, transmuting it into the realization? And that is the path of Vajrayana Tantra specifically. Vajrayana Tantra is about everything is included. Bring everything onto the path and use it as fuel for transformation. And the reason we're able to do this is because of the teachings, the energy body yogas of Vajrayana Tantra. When you're doing that level of energy body yoga, you are transmuting and transforming poison at the root. You are working at the level of consciousness itself and transforming your consciousness at the root. So therefore, you can dive into the totality of human experience and embrace all of it and be assured, have that trust and that confidence that you are in the process of transmutation. And then again, having a guide, having a Lama, having a teacher who can support you on the path and kind of nudge you in the right directions. But also, I really find that taking refuge is like my vow every morning to align myself with the highest good and truth and light and benefit for myself and all sentient beings. Mm-hmm. That's a powerful vow to take every day.
It absolutely is. And the practices of developing, as the term that you had brought up before, bodhicitta, which is this altruistic compassion. You're motivated by a desire to do good for yourself and others inextricably. So it's not just good for others. That can look like martyrdom. Mm-hmm. And it's not just good for the self. That can look like egotism. But it's
narcissism.
It's like recognizing that the self and the other, there is no boundary there. That boundary becomes very, very, very blurry. And these practices are designed to, like, if I just say, stop thinking dualistically, not going to work, right? It's not going to work at all. You have to chip away at the edges of it until you go, oh, wait a minute. Now that makes sense. And that is a process that takes time. That's why this is a lineage that is meant to be practiced as opposed to just read about or I got a good collection of notes on it, right? It has to be practiced because you have to experience it. You have to dig into the visceral sensation of what it's like to do these practices. And that literally does build compassion, not as a thought, but as a way of being.
Yeah.
As a way of being.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. And this is a path of embodiment, right? So it's not about escaping the body. It's not about creating aversion to the form, which is so rooted in patriarchy. Like patriarchy is so about aversion to the form, which in this tradition is represented by the feminine. So aversion to the feminine can be aversion to form can also be, whatever it's connected to aversion to the feminine. Yeah. Traditions that teach aversion to the feminine also teach aversion to the form and vice versa. So it is the path of embodiment. And again, this is the Shank Pikage lineage is considered the practice lineage. So it's not about reading a bunch of texts and having conceptual understanding. It's about embodied wisdom that arises from the inside out, literally from the cells out, that is a result of both your sexual and your non-sexual Tantra yoga practice. You have to have both. Like for the path of the yogi, you can't just be like fucking all day and like that's all you do as far as your path of realization. It's both. It's all of it. And it's not just like, it's not sex or non-sexual. It's about what I find, it's about weaving the totality of the mundane human experience into an expression, into the cauldron of spiritual power and bliss. Yeah. So through our meditation practice, we cultivate bliss consciousness. Mm-hmm. We cultivate presence, which is bliss consciousness. Yeah. Being present in this moment with no thought of past or future is a joyful freaking experience. That is so fun. And then we get to carry that experience into every activity, whether we're doing a podcast or whether we're doing a coaching session or whether we're designing a website or doing the dishes, whatever it is. And then applying that or using that, bringing that same presence and mindfulness into the sexual union practice deepens and enhances and enriches it even more and creates this energetic and chemical, fucking celebration in the system that even more firmly roots and anchors this wisdom awareness in the psyche. Mm-hmm. So it's about the true path of Tantra is not sexual or non-sexual. The true path of Tantra is life. Yeah. That's
literally every experience becomes a spiritual experience. And that from a Western perspective, that sounds really weird because your spiritual experiences happen on Sundays at church, or if you have a near-death experience, and that's kind of where the spiritual stuff happens. But with this, it's literally everything. It brings everything into it. And it's a question of how are you looking at it? How are you addressing it? How is this little thing a stand-in for all the other things, right? And so one of the things that in our society, we're becoming so literal in our capacity to, like, we take things at face value and that's it. So we're losing the capacity to think metaphorically and allegorically. And Tantra is actually in this respect, I think it's a counteract to that. Because you're developing your imaginative capacity, you're developing your metaphorical capacity, you're developing this allegorical ability to think, oh, wait, this thing is a stand-in for another thing. It's almost like your symbolic capacity becomes greater, and you're training it all the time. This allows you to see all kinds of patterns in the stuff that you do, whether it's in the little stuff or the big stuff. And you can use that as a guide for shaping your own spiritual growth and for allowing the stuff that's in the way of it to begin to drop away, because that stuff is not just going to show up in one place. It'll show up across the board in various ways, shapes, and forms. And if you can recognize it, you can work with it. It may be too hard to work in this location, but I can work in this location. And once this one's cleared out, then I can work over here and it works better too.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that's the other thing that I notice from that's a signpost of the realization from Tantra yoga practice is the lessening of dualistic thinking.
Yeah.
Right. So it's, it's the path of the monk or the path of the tantrika. It's this or that. It's, it's right or wrong. It's this black or white, high or low. And what the realization that's arisen for me is, well, maybe it's both. Maybe it's all. Mm-hmm. Maybe it depends on who's in front of you. And so that's the other thing about Vajrayana Tantra is it's traditionally back in the day with Ngakpa and stuff like that. Like it was teacher to student. It was one-on-one. It wasn't workshops and group classes and all, the stuff, the way that we in some ways are obligated to present it now. It was teacher to student. It was intimate. And it was a transmission. And so some of the richest teachings that I got from Lama Tashi didn't happen in the Dharma class, though those are very rich in and of themselves, but it was through the human connection. I lived on Kauai. Lama Tashi was part of my family. I had Christmas and Thanksgiving and parties and hangouts and beach days and all of that with the Lama. And so some of the most salient and profound wisdom was just transmitted, as just while we're hanging out drinking a beer. Yeah. Like teacher to student, because and if it was anybody else sitting there, it would have been a different communication. But because of who I am and who he is and our karmas together, the teachings that were given or that came through were very specific to our karma. Yeah. And that is the thing. So there's instructions that I personally have given to certain students that are appropriate for that student, but they're not appropriate for another student. Correct. So it's very, very, particularly when we're talking about the deeper teachings and some of the sexual teachings and, some of the more nuanced teachings, they're transmitted to that person. They're not necessarily, up for grabs, up for everybody. And that's something that we are learning to navigate and flow with in this modern age, because one of the other aspects of Tantra is we have stamped or declared our style of practice authentic Tantra, because it is an authentic expression of Tantra. It's not the only authentic expression of Tantra on the planet, but it is an authentic expression of Tantra, particularly from the understanding that Tantra is medicine for healing the root cause of all suffering, which happens right here. And transforming the root of suffering. But Tantra is organic. It's a living entity. It's a living transmission, and it's not codified. It's not conditioned by existence.
Yeah. It's almost anti-dogmatic.
Yeah, at its
as soon as you say it's this and only this, you start losing a lot of what it's about. And it's again, fluid and organic. It's a growing, living thing. And if it's treated as something other than that, you miss a lot of its potency.
And so this is where, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is where the both come in, because it's we're rooted in lineage, we're rooted in this tradition, and we have respect and honor for that. And at the same time, this is 2021. This is not 700 CE. This is not, 1000 CE or whatever the number is. This is a very different world. And so the methods have to be adapted and applied in a very different way for this modern age. And, if we're talking from the standpoint of what is your embodied wisdom, when you're actually rooted in wisdom, then what you teach is an expression of that. It's an expression of the realization of your Tantra yoga practice.
Yeah, it's not,
and it may not
lesson plan.
Exactly. And it may not look the way the traditional, the codes say it should look, But that doesn't mean that it's incorrect. It means it means that it's responding to the stimulus that is arising in this moment. And that response is appropriate or not, depending on your level of realization. Yeah. And ultimately, that realization should be growing. So my level of realization now, I'm not enlightened. I'm not claiming I'm enlightened. I'm not a Lama. I'm not claiming I'm a Lama. I have permission from my Lama to share and teach these lineage-based methods. And I can see personally, and the people around me can see the efficacy of the methods by the growth, by the realization, by the results of the practice. I am not the same person today that I was a year ago in my mind or my body. Yeah. I'm not the same person today that I was 10 years ago in mind or in body. Absolutely. And so a testament to if your Tantra yoga practice is effective for you is what is your realization? What is your growth? Yeah. And some signposts that came to us from our Lama, which I've shared before, that I will share again, are your relationships getting better? Is there more connection? Is there more joy? Is there less dysfunction? Are you caught in a trauma cycle? Yeah. A cycle of dysfunction where it's like every week or, whatever, you're going around the same loop over and over again? Or have you been able to break that pattern? It may be that the pattern arises, but are you able to recognize it and make a different choice? That's a signpost of growth. Are your relationships improving? Do you experience more joy for no reason, just spontaneously arising joy? Are you able to do you have more peace of mind, right? Do you have more peace, more inner peace? Do you feel more secure in yourself in a healthy, anchored, stable way? Is your life getting better? Yeah. These are all what are the fruits of your labor? What it's like a garden, like human consciousness is a garden that we cultivate. So what are the fruits of your practice? What is the tree of your life? What are the fruits that the tree of your life is bearing? And are these fruits productive or are they poison? Yeah. That's what we want to examine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just a quick check-in. What's the drama level in your life? If it's super high, check your practices. The more I made fun that the more that I practice, the less drama shows up in my life. The less chaos.
Well, it depends on the practice though, right? Yes, so you can do some practices like we were doing I was doing some protector practices and my drama level was off the hook. And then my Lama, this is why it's helpful to have a Lama. My Lama was like, change your practice. And he gave me another practice and everything smoothed out. Yeah. So that is a benefit of having a Lama, because sometimes we think, I want to do this thing because it's really fancy and groovy. And but it's not the right practice for you because of whatever's going on karmically. And there may be a different practice that may be more effective and smooth things out.
Yeah, without a doubt. But really, you're just looking at what are the results. Are you getting the promised results? Right. And if the results are, they're promising liberation and enlightenment, I can't say that I'm there yet, but I'm closer to it than it was.
Well, somewhat liberated, aren't we?
Somewhat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. More liberated today than we were even yesterday.
I would say yes.
Every day. Increase in liberation.
Yeah. And sometimes it's little things, but I'll notice things that used to just maybe fly off the handle. I'm like, oh, there's that thing again. Okay. I don't want to engage with that. And that's it. That's all there is to it. There's no drama. It's just no, I see it. No, thank you. And that comes from sort of this cultivation of mindfulness that happens through the practices and carries into everything that I do, whether it's going to the store or making love with my wife. It's all intertwined.
That's a happy thought. All right. Well, we got to wrap up this conversation. So I hope that sheds some light. I mean, there's so much more. Again, we were just tipping at the top of the iceberg and sharing the words that were coming through to share, but there's a whole
there's a lot.
Glacier under the surface of what there is to talk about this. So if you're interested in learning more about our particular lineage and tradition of Tantra, you can find out more at authentictantra.com. I highly encourage you to download my free ebook, Tantra is Medicine, Healing with the 5 Elements, in which I share my personal journey of healing and reclamation, particularly with the sexual application of the 5 elements. It wasn't just, sitting in my bedroom, oming and meditating. It was specifically the integration of the sexuality with these lineage-based tantric practices that catalyze such epic and such profound transformation and growth. So you can catch that, sign up for that at authentictantra.com. Stay connected to Sex is Medicine. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, all the networks. And follow us on Instagram and Facebook because we have lots of amazing stuff. Really, really, really loving our audience on Instagram. You guys are so amazing. So grateful for the engagement and the feedback that you're offering and sharing. And yes, so join us next week for another episode of Sex is Medicine, where we're going to be talking about the dark side of Tantra and sacred sexuality in the West. We're going to be decoding this a little bit more in depth. So have a wonderful night, everyone. And may you have juicy dreams and may you align with your ultimate bliss consciousness in every aspect of your life. Mani Padme Hum. You've been listening to Sex is Medicine with Devi Ward Erickson, your #1 resource for holistic sex education. You can listen to and subscribe to Sex is Medicine on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Just search Sex is Medicine with Devi Ward. Stay connected with me and my guests on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Authentic Tantra, and learn how you can use Tantra as medicine to heal, awaken, and empower every area of your life at authentictantra.com. Make sure to tune in to Sex is Medicine every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific on Contact Talk Radio Network, and join our watch party every Thursday evening on Facebook at Authentic Tantra. We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of Sex is Medicine with Devi Ward.